everybody, to start with. Right, let's get this going, shall we? Okay, dive in. Hopefully this laptop can cope. Minimize all this.
Yeah, we're seeing it perfect, so we're good to go.
Brilliant, great news. Okay, I'll get rid of that and let it load up. Well, I just want to say, firstly, a big thank you to BSUK for giving us the opportunity today to basically talk to you and go through this presentation. Basically, I want to be talking to you today about understanding the delivery. My aim is to go through a process of dispelling myths and some of the things we will hear on a regular basis here in the UK, progressing all the way forward, talking about how that all links together with the human body, and then basically pushing towards the end to talk about mechanics of the delivery itself. And then any questions and stuff, I'm going to get through the presentation, hopefully, and then at the end, open basically for any questions or discussions people want. I love chatting about this stuff, and to be honest, there's no stupid questions because, to be honest, it might not even be something I've thought of, and so that's an opportunity for us all to learn. So yeah, as said a little bit about myself, I'm a pitching coach for the women's national team, and also the head coach for the Sheffield Bruins women's team, and also help by pitching for the Sheffield Bruins now NBL team when we go compete this year. Overall, I've played baseball, God, as long as I can possibly remember. I've been on all ends of coaching, to be honest. I've had the good, the bad, and everything in between, basically. And in my experience, you tend to find that in the UK we don't really understand really how to deliver information and what information is right. And so you'll have all heard in your time things like a basic pitching coach saying to you, stride out further, get in front, stride out, or get out in front of the ball, get the ball out in front, get towards the catcher, or something like get open early, get that front side open, get towards the catcher, and these are all sort of like cues that you'll probably all heard floating around. And I'm just here today to say to you, we need to stop. Because what happened is when I was about 17 years old, I reached out to Great Britain to basically look to, pitch for their junior team. And then some less than a year later, after some bad coaching, growing up, I ended up with elbow surgery. That took me the best part probably of 4 or 5 years to get through, and for me it was tough. They're the parts of your years where you're learning the game, you're learning really to sort of grow into your body itself, and it was very tough for me. So that my delivery, and it's something that I've been working on to combat ever since. So hopefully people gain something from this and we learn a little bit. So without any further ado, I would also like to just reintroduce myself. Josh Taylor, I said the GB Women's senior team pitching coach, and I can't stress the thanks I've got to one of my close friends, a guy called Louis Fermetta, who is a player for the Sheffield Bruins. Basically, me and him, we constantly discuss these ideas. He's an absolute wizard when it comes to discussing mechanics, and I can't explain how much our conversations and debates in the early hours of the morning sometimes have gone to produce this presentation. So big thanks to Louis there. So without any further ado, here we go, understanding the delivery. So today, what are we going to cover? It's going to be a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest, guys. We're going to start with a little bit of a disclaimer. Got to get the fun stuff in early, and then I'm going to introduce you to a few concepts, and that's where the solutions to pitching will come in. And then we'll start to dive into a bit of the science, a bit of the anatomy, looking at the hips, the thoracic spine, and the shoulder. And then we're going to see how all that ties in to work towards a mechanical breakdown, looking at how we go from the first time we get on the rubber to what it looks like at ball release, and breaking down everything in between that. Okay, so as I said, we'll go for questions at the end, get everything. I'll give you a chance to write some notes and stuff in between slides. And if anybody wants to go back a slide, please just tell me during the thing, and I can hold up. But without any further, the fun disclaimer. Okay, guys, so the content of this presentation has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. This is not intended for the substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or otherwise qualified health provider for any questions you may have regarding medical condition or treatment. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've read or seen during this presentation. Basically, you know, if there's something you take from this and you want to investigate it further, ask somebody before you do, somebody who's qualified to go through this and, you know, trained medical professional, chiropractor, physio, doctor, you know, be sensible with it, all right? So, solutions to pitching. I've seen these you'll see these all the time on Facebook. They appear and it starts arguments with everybody talking about simple maths questions they got in school. And I want everybody here to have a look at this question now and try and solve it for the value of y. Okay? And it's an open thing. I want everybody to have a look at that. I'll put the answers on the screen, and there are 3 common answers you're probably going to get after doing that. If you don't get one of those 3 answers, guys, pitching is probably not the big problem. It's probably something to do with the maths at that point. So what I want everybody to do is just take a couple of seconds, just have a look at that. And basically, I know everybody at this moment in time is going, I came here to think about pitching. Why is he lecturing me about maths? I don't, you know, I left school however many years ago. And there's an honest reason behind that, and I'm going to give you a quick second, and I'm going to explain. So another 5 or so seconds, guys, and then we'll dive into it, and hopefully you can see all will become clear. So without any further ado, the grand reveal. Everybody remembers the good old BODMAS or BIDMAS. So we're talking about the brackets, the powers, or the indices, division, multiplication, addition, and subtraction. You go through this process and you follow it formulaically, okay? And you follow it in sequential order, and it comes out with an answer of y equals 29. I did double check this because it would have been very embarrassing if I got this wrong. But what I want you to take from this slide, okay, it's a little bit of a mind puzzle in the sense that it's be formulative in your approach fundamentally. How many times do we see in the UK and even further afield, coaches diving in trying to solve problems like, oh, their release point is wrong, you know, or they don't stride out correctly. You know, it's that glove side that's the problem, you know. And I'm here to tell you today, it's probably not that. The fact is, what we talk about here is, as you'll see at the bottom, it says, we're here to talk about upstream versus downstream problem on a micro and macro scale. Okay, and that's a really a sort of verbose scientific way of basically saying it's probably something you've done at the start that's affecting the end. So if you start badly, chances are you're going to finish badly. And macro and micro is basically, macro, I can see it with my own eyes. Micro, I'm going to have to get you a slow-mo video to see what you're doing because I physically can't see it at full speed. So that brings us then into anatomy, okay? And I want to talk just about understanding the hips fundamentally. So this is an opportunity, as I said, start your title slides because it's going to get into a bit of science here and, you know, take people probably back towards their biology days in school. So the first thing I want to cover is really this femur versus pelvis position. What we mean here is we're talking about the way that the femur bone, which is the upper part of the leg, interacts and sits in the socket of the pelvis itself. And typically what you're going to find here is that there's a notable difference between youth athletes, female athletes, and male athletes. Youth athletes tend to be underdeveloped in the way they are. They're quite flexible and can get into a range of like different situations with their hips. They can move from a massive range there. And what we tend to find with female athletes as well, they don't show any particular dominance in either direction. They can go for a wide range of anteversion or retroversion. But what we typically see with a lot of like post-puberty male athletes is that they fall into one of these 3 categories. Okay, most people have normal anteversion, and what you'll see by the picture on the far left is the 2 dots line up. And as if you imagine this is a right-handed thrower delivering the ball towards home plate, what you tend to see is that as they push off or drive forward, that femur bone and the ball in the socket will move smoothly and freely in there. Okay. We compare that now to somebody who is excessively anteverted, and this is somebody such as myself here, whose hip sits basically, their femur sits back inside the hip socket. And why this is a problem, if you try to stride out from that position, what we'll typically find is you'll find the athlete might complain about sharp pains, aches, or real stiffness in and around the joints. this over a period of time can start to manifest itself in problems such as tightness in and around the SI joint, and will take really some physio or osteopathic work to start to get that range of motion back, and it can get worse over time if not looked at. By contrast, retroverted hips, where it's sitting forward inside the hip socket, and by contrast, these people have to pitch in a completely different manner to an anteverted person, but will display much the same symptoms if we try and put them in a position where the femur bone isn't rotating correctly inside the hip joint. Okay, so people are saying, well, how do we correct that? So we want to correct that in multiple ways, and the main way we can do this is you're just going to see later, you can adjust it with your mechanics, but there's a real fundamental way to do it, and it's a process. If we're to correct excessive anteversion here, process of in-toeing. So fundamentally, all that is taking the front foot and turning it in. So if you imagine you're setting yourself up on the rubber, we'll simply start with the heel to the rubber, and the toes will point inwards. Okay. Somebody who's showing retroversion in their hips would typically go the other way around, put their toes onto the rubber and stay off. Often what you might hear a coach say is something along the lines of, well, how would you squat? And, as somebody who is extremely internally rotated, my feet when I squat are still, my toes are pointed out, and it in no way impacts the way that I would squat. So don't be confused with that. Okay. But this, again, the second point in the slide is really key here. You want your toes to be around 5 and 15 degrees relative to this neutral position that you see on the left. I don't want people going 30, 40, even 90 degrees inwards, because all it's going to do is produce excess tension. And when a good feeling to know that you've done it about right is, as you start to turn the toe in or out to feel this, you'll notice that once it reaches a point where you start to feel tension in the back leg, and specifically in the glute, you're probably getting to a point where you're going to an excessive range and you need to dial it back ever so slightly. So what does that mean overall? Okay, so there's a lot of information here, and I appreciate that, but the table on the right is really where we're looking. So what this is good hip IR and good hip PR. These are your athletes that tend to find stuff really easy to move through these ranges. So a really great example of this for people wanting to Google what this looks like is somebody like Yu Darvish. Yu Darvish can move exceptionally well. He can clear huge range between his knees as he strides out down the mound, and that makes it very easy for him to deliver the ball effectively. And the main thing here is it gives him a bigger range of motion, and therefore gives him a bigger area for error to sort of land within his delivery to still achieve what he wants. Okay, but as you'll notice, it mentions hypermobility. And hypermobile athletes, basically what happens is an athlete that's hypermobile can sometimes suffer with proprioceptive problems in the body. So basically their ligaments and tendons are struggling to respond basically efficiently to the stretches that we're putting them under. And this is an increased risk, especially when we're talking about high impact or ballistic movements. And that's why you tend to find that these athletes have knee problems, elbow problems, shoulder problems, things like that during their time. And as it says there, typically this is on a 3-time scale. And that was in a study by Leagat and Pedersen in 2021 that actually found out that this is basically a 3-fold problem. And then I go on, as I said, to where we have good hip internal and poor hip external, or vice versa, as a problem. And this is actually quite useful, because I know in baseball we don't want to talk about black and white. We know that we can't be cookie cutting our solutions. But what's really important to know is that basically the way in which our hips work can be we can almost be slightly prescriptive with this. And as we go through the presentation, stride into the mechanical aspects of it, you're going to see that even though somebody has clear dominance one way or another, you will still see that there is variations in the way they deliver the ball. And I'll try and highlight that as we go through. But with this, we can, as coaches, really target these people to make very clear and decisive input to their delivery, and hopefully see positive change very early on. And a good way to test this really is what we call the split test, to see where we are. And you can do this easily without any external requirements. So all you need is a speed gun. Have somebody start in-toed, then have 10 throws, don't give them any feedback on the velocity. Neutral, 10 throws, don't give them any feedback. And then into out-toed or external rotation, and repeat the process again. And what you'll tend to see is that an athlete may have a region of 2 to 3 mile an hour difference and display a significant increase or decrease in command behavior between the range of motion, showing how their hips and are able to clear better. So therefore, basically helping the velocity of the ball as well. Sadly, we come to this bottom right corner, and these are stiff movers. These are people that are quite difficult to review and analyze, and they typically have very poor range of motion in there, and they have, as a result, have to max out their thoracic spine, so the back, in order to deliver the ball more effectively. When we say these are low velocity throwers, you can still throw easily 90 mile an hour if you fall into this category, providing that you are able to maximize things like the thoracic spine adequately. But the best way with these people is to carry out sort of mobility work. So that's things like doing thoracic spine windmills, bench teed spine mobilizations, peanut extensions, and basically thoracic IYs and T's, things like that. As I said, always speak to a physio if you're going to start undergoing like mobility-based training. But as I said, when we talk about the T-spine, it's really important to understand that as well as part of the delivery. So this section is going to be basically covering the thoracic spine and giving you a little bit of information about why that's useful. So what we're looking at here, basically the thoracic spine sits between the cervical and the lumbar spine in the back, okay? Where the cervical and the lumbar spine are typically used for stability, the region of T1 to T12 in the back is the thoracic spine, and that allows an athlete to get into what we've all probably heard as hip-shoulder separation, which is basically us trying to coil against ourselves, like wringing out a towel, in order to generate the maximum energy to release into that ball. But as with anything, it's the weak link in the whole kinetic chain. If we don't have this, we really have to go to that and maximize that and start working on that in order to achieve high velocity and good command in a pitcher's thing. And because repeatability is a huge factor, and an athlete suffering with thoracic spine tightness is going to really struggle with that. Okay, so that's something to bear in mind as we go forward. And finally, I want to talk to you about just understanding the arm and shoulder. So we've all seen some really great pictures of pitchers in their time with their arms like wound all the way back in what we call layback, and everybody goes, wow, that looks absolutely disgusting. And you know, it doesn't look pleasant, I'll openly admit, but it's a natural thing that the body can do. And what we tend to find is that in nations where people have played baseball or swum or played racket sports for a large proportion of their youth life, they develop significant external rotation. So as you can see from the diagram on the left, external rotation is where the arm is moving in a backwards position, and internal rotation is obviously the forward point. What tends to happen in athletes with poor external rotation, they will then use their thoracic spine to help basically create mobility if they do have poor external rotation. We can typically increase the external rotation range, but what you will find actually most interestingly is that you will typically not increase the complete range of motion. You will simply share or change the ratio between internal and external rotation. So what this is in the UK, we're taught from a young age to basically muscle up and throw the ball as hard as we can. And fundamentally that doesn't work. The way a good pitcher delivers the ball is loose. Tension is the last second thing. And you're going to start seeing that as we go through the mechanical aspects of this. But I want people to just be aware of this. And it helps when I'm talking about internal, external rotation, that people just have an idea of what I'm talking about in terms of just the scientific terms, just in case you know, people are a bit confused with them. Okay, so I really want to start here with something that we're quite proud of at the Britain national team, and that's basically our pitching philosophy. Okay, so we talk about commit, command, and compete, and these are things that we talk about with our athletes all the time, and it's basically the fundamental part of our framework in how we approach our pitchers themselves. And what I really like about this is it encompasses everything from the physical to the mental game. Okay, it's the training, it's the hydration, the sleep, the making sure you go to the gym, making sure you don't skip what you're required to do to be at that next level. Okay. Everybody knows you commit to a training program. You know, you commit to your work, you commit to your teammates, and it really is something that everybody can get behind. And the way that that does is you're taking command of that. And as a result, not only are you taking command of your training itself, your command will improve on the mound. You know, and as a result, the final part of that is compete. If everything before that has worked, you'll go out there and you will compete. You know, you can go up against anybody in the world and you can still compete if you've done everything right in your preparation. That's the way it will work. And that's why, you know, everybody knows the phrase that any team can beat any other team on their given day. And I do believe that, you know, so it's something to bear in mind. But I want to just talk before we get into the actual detailed aspects of these are the three biggest things we believe. So we call it the three big rocks, or the biggest rocks of the delivery. That's the stable back leg, the front leg brace, and the arm action. Okay. And I want people to be really aware of those, because these are the things we're trying to get our athletes to be able to do when we work through them with their gym work, with their stabilization, with their mobility work, and the plyometrics, and how these are all going to link together as we go through this presentation. But what I do want to say is, to achieve this is where it gets quite interesting. We don't have to do the same thing with every athlete. And so we can achieve this in multiple ways based on their strengths and limitations. Okay, so let's dive into it now. Okay, so this is going to be the way we talk about now, from start of the delivery all the way through to ball release. So this is going to be the mechanical breakdown, talking about the setup and really diving into sort of the meaty stuff that everybody came here for. You know, I finished with the science lesson, guys, and I'm sure some people are pleased with this. But yeah, you will see how it all clicks together, I hope. So what we're going to be talking about here is hip internal rotation dominance. So as you remember, if we go back to the anteverted hip, the hip sat back in the, the femur sat back in the hip. These athletes, I'm sure you know, Shohei Ohtani, Blake Snell, Diego Castillo, all big names, okay? But these are all internally rotationally dominant pitchers, okay? And I want to start with these because every one of these athletes at this moment in time is thinking about keeping, when they go into this setup position, as their basically their center mass either through the middle or the inside of their foot, okay? They're not thinking about staying to the outside of the foot, because it becomes very difficult for them to clear down or drive forward correctly if their weight is too far outside, okay? And we go to this this position now where we talk about how do they do that? You know, their back foot, what is their back foot position doing? So you see with Blake Snell, he's going for that slight in-toeing position there. During his wind-up phase, he will step and he'll find that in-toe position in order to set himself up to go forward, okay? And people say, well, you know, everybody sets up neutrally, okay? So why do I need to start doing this? The fact of the matter is you don't. But as you will see later on down the line, there's multiple ways. So for me, I prefer to in-toe ever so slightly, because it helps me find tension in the back hip when I go into my leg lift. For others, they prefer to coil more. But as I said, you'll see more of that as we go through the presentation. Big things that I want to raise here as well. People don't think about where they stand on the rubber. A big thing in the UK is you end up a pitching rubber and then a huge crater being dug out of it, you know? And people go, well, where do you stand on the rubber? And the guy just stand in the crater that the previous person created for me. And, you know, I want to say to you, try and get out of that habit. Think about how that works. If you're a right-handed thrower and you're facing a right-handed batter, get yourself to the right-hand side of the rubber, because as you throw the ball, unless you happen to be significantly over the top, if you throw from a 3/4 arm slot or a side arm slot, you know, that ball is going to be out of the viewer's perspective. They're going to have to turn to physically see your hand coming through that that side plane in order to pick the ball up, which increases your deception, okay? And I really want to stress that these are some of the factors as well, because, you know, everybody talks about the physical, like, you know, you've heard the phrase like velocity kills. Every scout out there is looking for a hard thrower. But fundamentally, sometimes it's about the mental game as well, that deception factor, making it difficult for the batter. And as pitchers, we don't want to just do what's easy. We want to do what's effective, you know. Throwing 98 mile an hour, there's plenty of guys in the minor leagues that can do that, but they never make it to the majors because they're not deceptive enough, you know. Obviously, it goes further than simply just where you stand on the rubber, but these are factors that are going to help. Most notably, they've got separation between their feet when they're in the stretch. So Ohtani and Castillo here, are both in the stretch position, and that means that their front foot is separated more significantly from the back foot. As they go up, it will promote drift. Drift is basically the forward movement of the center of mass away from the rubber. So we're creating displacement away from that rubber as we go forward, okay? And there's a difference between that and falling. The way I view falling is if I was to push you from the back, your shoulders would typically stay back and your hips would jar forward. And what you'll notice with a lot of these athletes is they stay nice and stacked, their torso and their shoulders over their hips as they go forward. But what you'll see as well is they're in minimal tension here. They're not tense, they're not creating excess tension. They're nice and loose and ready to deliver the ball. And again, that goes for the same for their arm action. You know, they're trying to just keep that nice and loose, and they're thinking loose all the way through their delivery. So that brings us on to the equal and opposite problem, externally dominant pitchers. Okay, so what we're seeing is guys like Mike Clevenger, Price, Arrieta. You know, these are all guys that have significant external rotation. And what you'll see here is they typically have their foot in a neutral position or out-toed. What you'll see there with like Clevenger, you'll see it with Arrieta, Price in the wind-up there with that neutral foot position. But most interesting, their weight is over the back leg. Look at the way Jake Arrieta specifically stood there. His weight is right over basically the outside of his back foot. He's thinking stay back on that, stay stacked, have a strong, tall back leg. You know, Clevenger, not so much. He's probably stood over the middle of his foot, you know, but fundamentally, they're trying to do the same thing, thinking about where their weight displacement is. But again, having minimal tension at this point. And their arm action, again, the same position, thinking loose and easy at this point. So that takes us now to, we want to start delivering the ball. What does that look like? Okay. So the initial move, as this loads in for you. So this is where it starts to get really interesting in the difference, and you'll start to notice this here, is we've got hip internal rotation dominance here with guys like Shohei Ohtani, like Pearson. I apologize, the GIFs do appear to be lagging ever so slightly here, and I do apologize about that. If you try and watch what they're doing, you'll notice that they're maintaining the coil, they're maintaining their weight displacement on the middle or the inside of their foot. Okay, so that's really something to take note of with Pearson here and Sorry, both of them trying to stay on with the weight on the inside of the foot to increase the drift, get that center of mass moving forward. Okay, Ohtani here, people are saying, well, Ohtani, he goes backwards, but this is something where if you look, he's still trying to coil, keep that weight moving forward when he gets to the top. He just begins and initiates his drift slightly later than the other two athletes. Okay, but what the big takeaway from this point is, I want you to look at the way their lead leg, so the foot coming up, coils backwards towards second base. Their torso stays nice, straight shoulders straight towards home plate, or just maybe slightly towards a right-handed batter for these right-handed throwers. Their leg coils to one side, and then they accept the drift. People will be saying, oh, well, Drew Storen is forcing his hips out, but that's a camera perspective thing based on basically his massively internally dominant behavior, basically. So big thing as well is their hips are level. Think about a bowl of soup. Imagine your hips are a bowl of soup, really hot soup. You don't want to go spilling hot soup everywhere, you know, so keep those hips level throughout the entire delivery. When we compare this to externally dominant guys, again, you can see that with Verlander. Look how his center of mass, basically his weight displacement, he's over that back leg at peak leg lift there. You know, he's thinking about keeping all his weight on the middle outside of that back foot as he begins to go forward. He's not, unlike the others, they're not coiling back on themselves. Their leg comes straight up, and if anything, their whole body rotates as one giant block. So they think rather than bringing their lead knee back towards second base, they're thinking, keep that in front of me, and if I want to, rotate my entire body as a block. But you'll see most of them just come up and start their drift. They're not coiling, and this is why it's interesting, but they're still achieving the drift itself with those hips in that level position. Look at here, look at the way Max Scherzer himself, he's not coiling at all. That leg goes up and he comes straight back down and towards home, right? So they're really subtle differences between the two. So now we've gone into our peak leg lift. Where do we want to go from there? Well, it's what we call the hinge, where we sit back into the hips, and the stride phase, obviously, where we try and get down the mound and get towards the the catcher and release the ball. It's one of those things where I want to really emphasize the fact that I hate the phrase stride out. And I want to say to people, despite what you may hear, striding further does not mean you'll necessarily throw harder. In the UK, we're told this, and what you'll tend to see is a huge problem where the back leg will push. And I want to say at this point, all we're trying to do is create, once we go into peak leg lift, the point where our knee is the highest at the start of the delivery, we're trying to find tension in that back leg, at which point we hold the tension for as long as we feel comfortable, and then we release the tension. Think of it like stretching an elastic band in the back of the leg, and then releasing that elastic band to drive the hips forward to face the catcher into ball release. Okay, so that's the way you've got to think about it here, right? So don't think I've got to get further. Sometimes even striding shorter is a benefit. Okay, so don't worry about how far you go. Worry about the way in which you stride out. Okay, so these guys here, Ohtani, Diaz, Storen, what you'll see typically is firstly their back knee angle. What you're seeing there is that back knee is always facing third base in their case, but it starts to bend towards an acute angle. So it goes within inside that 90-degree point very early. It's like they try to keep their back knee up, and then it caves in and keeps towards third base for as long as they can before they start their rotation. All right. And this is because they're basically having to maximize the rotation in their hips. If we think back to the anatomy slide, these athletes cannot get their knees to move apart. It's uncomfortable for them and very difficult. Look at the way Storen and Diaz are moving here. Okay, and that brings us on to our stride direction and our lead foot. Okay, look at them, they're striding close, their foot is back towards second base for as long as it possibly can. Ohtani not so much, but he does have some external behaviors, but Diaz and Storen in particular are exceptionally close at this moment in time, and that's to give their hips the most room they can without feeling that jarring, that SI pin, that tightness, that sharp load in the back of their hips. Okay, so they stay closed and then they use that to snap the hips open as they go. But fundamentally, they're still having hips level throughout the delivery. Okay. Again, with Drew Storen, it is a perspective of the camera, right? Arm action itself here, as I said, they're separating somewhere between the letters and the belts, and their wrist is exiting the glove in a neutral position. Neutral position means they've not got any bend in their wrist at all. It's nice and in line, loose, ready to accept the flip up that comes later. By contrast, we're going to look at hip external guys here. So if you think back to the other slide now where you saw their knee would start to cave very, very quickly. Take a look at somebody like Hicks here. Look how long that back knee stays over the back foot for, okay? He's able to hold that position. That's what we mean where their hips. He doesn't have to, unlike the internal guys who have to think about keeping their knees together. You know, that's a good cue for them. Keep the knees together, keep the foot back in order to get forward. Hicks is able to hold that knee vertically so the knee's over the foot for as long as he can. And a good way, if somebody's got external rotation, they want to increase that vertical shin position, so the 90-degree position of their shin, they can slightly out-toe their foot. So it says foot ER angle here. And now what we mean is going back to the out-toe where we put the toe on the rubber itself. Okay, but look at Verlander here as well. He's a really good example of this. Jake Arrieta, he's kind of like Ohtani in the last one. He shows signs of it, but he's not as pronounced as Verlander or Hicks, but he still does what we've described there. So his stride direction is actually, they're striding open. Look at the lead foot of Verlander here. He's trying to get that toe directly to the catcher as soon as he possibly can, using the fact that he can hold that massive range in his hips to get open, hold that back leg stable for as long as he can before he fires everything into front foot strike. Okay. Now think about how that compares to the internally rotated guys and them having to hold their hips close because otherwise they feel that pain and that sharpness in the back. Again, hips level. But this is why as coaches, we have to look at athletes and start to understand, well, if I'm telling them to stride open and get on target and that athlete can't because they're internally dominant or vice versa, we're going to say, it basically comes back to Einstein's quote, if you forever judge a goldfish on its ability to climb a tree, it will forever think it's stupid. Okay, and the same can be said for our athletes. They'll think that they're not very good if we're coaching them incorrectly. You know, if we want to maximize our athletes, we have to know this and understand the anatomy of this in order to deliver this correctly. And as I said, the difference between male and female athletes after puberty is that the female athletes tend to have much better range in both directions, so they can get away with slightly more than the male equivalent. All right. But again, look at the hands separating somewhere between the letters and the belt, wrist in that neutral position. So this takes us through to front foot strike. Okay, so this is where we're trying to crash into the floor, get ready to send the energy all the way up the chain and let it be delivered by the arm, basically. So what we're looking at here, again, is internal dominance. And this is where it starts to get interesting, because again, that cue, think about that horrible cue that we talk about in the UK of get towards the target. Right? Look at the way it's, thanks to the camera angle, you can see it in Diaz and Storen specifically, that they're landing cross body. Okay, they're getting across themselves, and what the reason for this is they've got so much room in their hips in the internal dominated plane that basically when they land, they have to absorb the slack somehow, otherwise they'd simply crash into the floor and end up doing either a push from their back leg or lunging horrendously through that front knee. And that's something we see in the UK, where athletes typically lunge forward as they're going forward. Okay. And so that's really important, that these athletes who display this internal rotation can land cross-body most generally. But one other point, as you'll notice, it says general assumption, because again, it comes back to the fact that pitching isn't black and white, it's grey. There is going to be athletes that are internally dominant that much prefer to stride on target because they don't like the cross-body approach. By contrast, Jake Arrieta, who's an external guy, likes to stride cross-body simply because it's something he prefers, you know, and the Cubs found that, and he had great success with them. Okay, but what I want you to look at here is the way that every one of them lands full foot. Okay, so that front foot hits the floor completely flat. Okay, the athlete lands from above and they get into that foot, and that basically they're trying to think about hitting the floor hard and create a reaction force. So as Newton's laws say, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Okay, that impact is trying to fire the hips open. Okay, and that's what they're looking for here. Okay, they're trying to create a reaction force to click the hips open. Okay, we tend to typically find between 4 and 8 meters per second of the right hip in this case is the difference roughly between 70 and 90 mile an hour. You know, we're talking that sort of range. So what it says here is drive leg rotation highlights early hip internal rotation. So what that means is these athletes, when we talk about stable back leg, so right from the key points that we had in our rocks earlier, when we're talking about stable back leg, you think, well, we want to keep that knee towards third base as long as we can. And what people get confused with internally dominant guys is that leg looks like, as it starts, the angle starts to become more acute, so less than 90 degrees. What basically starts to happen is people go, oh, well, he's got an unstable back leg, which isn't true, because these guys are programmed, their body is telling them to hold that back leg and let the back leg bend forward while keeping that foot in contact for as long as we can. Okay, but as we go through here, what you'll notice with every single one of these players is that their weight distribution, that center of mass, is either over the middle of their body, so centrally, or over the back hip. Okay, because this, I want to get rid of another one of those facts where people say, oh, well, if you're missing high, think about throwing further out, lower with your arm, or if you're missing low, aim higher. It's nothing to do with that. The reason we miss high or low is because when we get at this specific point in time, if that weight is not stacked correctly, if we're not over that back hip or central, we will miss either high or low. And that's the fundamental crux of it. It's nothing to do with what the arm's doing. The arm is a downstream problem of our upstream movement. Okay, so unless we are balanced at this point, we won't. And if you have an athlete that has control problems, they keep missing high or low, look at them at this point. Where are they? You know, are they missing high? Are they missing low? You know, what does that tell you? All right. So big thing about the arm action at this point as well is it's looking to flip up. So it's loose. There's no tension in the arm. Look at the way, like Martinez here, he's just able to just let the arm flip up nice and casually. It looks like he's not even trying. It's just loose, almost floppy in a way. Okay. He lets it flop up between 45 and 90 degrees. Okay. And the big thing with all of them, as you'll notice, their shoulder and their elbow is all in line. We don't want to see athletes where their elbow starts to climb above their shoulders or where it's low, because both cases, what we can tend to find is that you might start to generate, especially in the high position, impingement in the shoulder. Okay. That impingement over time can start to cause problem, causes inflammation, and that increase in inflammation over time can therefore start to lead to tearing of the muscles. And before you know it, you have a significant shoulder problem, which can require surgery. Okay, especially if that athlete is young and playing multiple sports, it's something to watch out for, okay? But I want to highlight at this point again, their arm is loose, all right? They're not thinking about tensing up and muscling up their arm at this point. It simply isn't the case. They're just letting the arm be nice and floppy at this point. By contrast, these hip external rotation guys then. So what we're looking at is they typically land lead foot to the target. So look at the way Max Scherzer specifically here is landing, because it's the nice view where we can see him coming down the mound. You'll see that it's almost like he's got two lanes. Like you could draw a line between that back foot to the right foot and his front foot on the left. You could draw a line and you can see that they're separated. So the left foot remains to the left, the right foot to the right. He's not striding crossbody. He's getting towards his target. Okay. Again, some athletes don't like this, but what you'll tend to find is for somebody who's got hip external, this is the way they can maximize that tension, use that tension to fire the hips open and then brace adequately. Whereas somebody in internal rotation, he's going to sink into the floor and be unable to. Okay. What you tend to find these athletes, if they land cross body, it will feel uncomfortable for them. It'll feel like their hip is taking up basically too much too early, and it will start to cause them discomfort in some cases. And again, that's something for you as a coach, if they're complaining about that feeling, for you to look at where are they landing. Okay. Again, this is a problem that is very real. But in both cases, look at their arm. Look at the way Verlander, as he hits the floor, his elbow is in line with his shoulders, and that arm is between 45 and 90 degrees, where 90 degrees obviously is hand to the sky and 0 degrees is hand parallel to the floor. So this takes us towards mechanical, the breakdown of basically the ball release and the follow through. Okay, so everybody goes, wow, there's a lot of information to digest on this slide, and I do apologize for that. Okay, but I wanted to really allow everybody to see that everybody here, whether they're internal, external, dominant, you can see the way their arm goes into what we remember if we think about talking about max external rotation. You can see the way their arm is laying back and able to absorb that force. Okay, as their front foot hits the floor, their hip is hit, their front foot hits the floor hard, and it helps the hip fire open, absorbing that slack and creating a point to brace over. It's why we don't want to think about getting too far and striding too far, because what it does is as we stride too far, and you can try it yourself, if you later today reach towards the catcher with your throwing hand and then try and get towards them, you start to bend that front leg. And if you watch DeGrom here, how his leg goes into extension, so it straightens out, he's not forcing it to do that. He's not pulling back. He's not thinking about that. If you compare it to if you do that, by good British baseball coaching, you'll tend to find that you're actually sinking the floor. You lose speed and you'll start to sink down. All your energy goes downwards. The reason we want this brace, and this is where we go into our big rock too, okay? And it's all to do with we've landed well, we've landed what works for our body. And this brace is going to send energy up the kinetic chain. And that's going to help us increase our ball speed, okay? Create a pivot point, which we're going to use to basically anchor ourselves and rotate over the top of. And when we look at the arm then, returning to the arm, it's a curvilinear path. And everybody's going, wow, that sounds like science, mumbo jumbo. And, you know, it's a very fancy way of saying it moves from a curved position to a linear position, okay? And the closest thing I can describe it to is maybe a baseball swing, or more accurately, a golf swing, okay? You start with the golf club up, you curve down, you hit the ball, and you want to hit that ball linearly, send the ball as far down the fairway as you can linearly. You don't want to hit it curved because otherwise you're going to slice it, okay? You want to send it as far down that fairway as you can, and the club will continue from that point and rotate away, okay? The same goes for the arm. The arm starts, it's curving, and then the arm gets to a point where if you look at DeGrom, you look at Diaz, any of these athletes here, they're not getting their arms out in front of them. They're not stretching and reaching like Superman towards their target. At ball release, they're pulling their arm from behind. So their arm is loose, it's loose. They hit the floor. And what happens as they hit the floor, their leg braces. It causes the hips to finally fire open. So that little bit of hip opening that they couldn't get fires forward. They've now got maximum hip-shoulder separation. So their hips are forward, their shoulders are back, right? So their shoulders are facing third base, their hips are forward. And then what happens is their arm will basically, their upper half moves through and the arm will come through this really loose thing following them. And as they go through that curved path, they get just in front of their own head. So at maximum arm stretch, their arm is straight out and just to the side. it's just in front of the head at maximum external rotation, and they then apply massive intent. That's the moment they pull the ball, okay? They're not thinking, oh, I'll pull the ball while my arm's all the way back. They're waiting, they're waiting, they're waiting, they're waiting. It lays back because it has to be loose to lay back. If I say to you, be loose and throw the ball, you'll see your arm will naturally whip backwards. If I then tell you to muscle up and be strong with your arm, you'll notice you'll probably lose in the region of about 50 or 60 degrees in maximum external rotation, so that layback of the arm, simply because of the fact that you're not remaining loose. So when we deliver our intent, it wants to be at that last possible second as the arm gets towards that extended position, and then we pull from behind. And this goes against what we see in British baseball, which is where you can see people's elbows leak out in front of their torsos, absolute worst case, and throw the ball like a shot put, or their elbow sinks low and they push the ball forward, okay? These are really bad things, because what we'll do is it will cause a snapping of the arm, and that causes pains in the back of the elbow known as distal tricep pain, which is basically manifests itself as more familiar as a tennis elbow, okay, things like that. So we want to avoid this. And if you look at Diaz, again, just watch the way his arm lays back. It's so loose. And then he just pulls at that last second from behind. When it reaches that maximum point, pulls and releases the ball, okay? The follow through itself, the elbow doesn't break the midline of the body. So if you imagine drawing a line from the top of your head through the nose all the way down to the floor, the elbow itself does not cross that midline of that point, right? And people have this habit where they throw their arm across their body, and it causes significant, again, raising peak stress levels in and around the arm. And that's something that we have to be aware of, because it can lead to more severe problems. When we release the ball, I want people to think about the way they pronate, okay? It's really interesting because pronation seems to be something that we lose as we get older if we're not aware of it. You pass a bottle to a toddler and let them throw it, you'll notice that they pronate, okay? But what happens is, as we get older, we don't think about this. We start to think about getting in front and pulling down. We don't want to pull down. We want to stay behind the ball and basically let it pull from behind, okay? Rather than that pushing effect of trying to get on top of the ball, okay? So that's something to really be aware of here. So we're thinking that thumb down motion, and then let the trunk rotate into completion, okay? So wrapping this up then, conclusive points for you to take home. These are the big takeaways that I want people to think about, is avoid the cookie cutter approach as a coach, okay? As coaches, we need to understand how anatomy is essential if we're to maximize success. Too often do I see people go, that athlete isn't very good because they can't do X, Y, and Z. I've given them a rolling drill where we start with the hips forward and the shoulders back, and that athlete's foot spins out. You know, maybe they're externally dominant in their hips. Or I'm doing a drill where I tell them to put a ball against the wall and hold that ball against the wall for as long as they can while they throw their baseball. Maybe they're internally dominant and can't do that. I know for a fact I can't do that. And that's one of those things we need to, as coaches, educate ourselves, okay? And that brings us to my point of be formulaic. Success manifests itself over time. So when we were talking earlier about downstream issues, don't try and fix a release point, okay? If their release point is bad, okay, what is the source of that problem? You know, think about it. What's the upstream problem? Is it an athlete's mobility, stability, strength, even their anatomy, okay? And then if it's not, what they do mechanically? Are they internally dominant but trying to stride out and use that front leg to swing it open, or are they staying closed and driving out that back leg and they're externally dominant? You have to think about these things. Are they landing close, are they landing open? You have to understand and try and talk with them and find out. And even if we go back to that point of we think we can follow what you've said here, remember it's grey and things do vary, okay? But these are main things. Comfort, and again, mindset. The athlete might not like it, you know? They might not like that feeling of coiling their hips right against it and struggling to go almost backwards down the mound. And that's where it begins into the next point of anticipate the grey, okay? Athletes' deliveries are very, they're unique to that person, okay? So we have to attack these upstream problems but be adaptive to the way we respond to it. You know, again, it's the grey, okay? It takes time for these athletes to adjust, and do not look at what you've seen today and go, got it, I can instantly fix that kid or that adult, and they're going to be 10 times better tomorrow. You know, they've got to get used to it, and trial and error is acceptable, okay? Let them feel it out, you know, be that coach that lets them figure it out. Let them be athletic. Don't be the person that tells them they have to do this. Let them figure that out for themselves, but use it to guide, Okay. And that brings me to my final point. You don't want to deliver this information to your athletes like, oh, well, you're internally dominant, so you have to think this. Externally dominant, you have to think this. You know, your arm is this. You need to find that in ways to cue that to your athletes. Things like knee to knee. You know, I want your arm to stay high, get the arm high, and that will teach them to stay in line with their shoulders and their elbow. Things like that they can focus on. And then big thing, where does the ball go when they've thrown it? If they're throwing against a wall or a net, does it hit throwing side, head high, and then bounce back off the wall directly in a straight line? If it does, that curvilinear path is great. If it hits the wall low, high, then their center of mass is off. You know, they're either tilted back or forward from front foot strike. You know, if they're missing left and right, are they landing too far open? And that means that by the time their hips are able to absorb the slack, they're basically facing the dugout. You think about Drew Stoneman and how internally dominant he was in his delivery. By the time, if he strode straight open, by the time his hips have absorbed that tension, he's probably thrown into the dugout and he's lost 5 miles an hour on his throw as well. You know, it's these sort of things. And then a couple of final points. If you see an athlete's velocity drop, let them adapt. Things take time, all right? And it can be bigger factors such as mental health, nutrition, sleep, and hydration are also influencing it, okay? It's a really big thing. My actual other job is I fly airlines for one of Europe's major airlines, basically. And I know for a fact that if I'm dehydrated after a flight, I won't perform as well in the gym or when I throw. So that's something to consider. Okay. But I hope in all of that, you've taken something from it. I'd love now to invite questions. And I just want to say thank you very much for giving me the opportunity and taking time to listen to me.
Thank you, Josh. Much appreciated. Lots of advice, lots of stuff that we don't think about. We don't analyze, and the things you're analyzing at the big leagues, you know, this is stuff we should be looking at with young kids already, as you and I had spoken before, you know, getting that done at the right levels, at the right ages, and getting the mechanics all right going forward so that we're not having to break bad habits later on in life.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
To everybody out there, if you questions for Josh, please just type them up, and we can get Josh to answer any questions.
I said it can be about anything related to pitching. As I said, I openly invite people to ask questions about this, because this is something that is making its way in at the higher levels, but I don't believe it's really filtered its way down into sort of grassroots level yet, or even some college players. You know, they don't understand this. So it's something I really want to encourage that people ask about and start to get to grips with.
Yeah, people, don't be shy. Here's your chance. Josh is on screen here now. You'll be able to ask anything about pitching, anything. You know, there we go. Charlie, any advice on identifying relievers and starters? What traits to look for? What conversations to have with athletes? Thanks, Charlie.
Awesome. Good question. This is always a tough question, because there's often a perception for me around the fact that people have this weird thought process that the starter is the best pitcher, you know, and that's not true. You know, it's all to do with basically their mental approach, really. How does that athlete behave? You know, how do they perform best? I know for a fact that an athlete that such as myself, if I'm given a position where I know there's bases loaded and the pressure is on, I will perform better. That's where I thrive. I can go from 0 to 1,000 in no time at all to get ready to go in and throw that. I enjoy that challenge. Other people like that preparedness, and I think what it is looking at the way the athletes go, maybe challenging them in different ways in game situations to give them more time to get ready, or have them get ready and simulate it like it was a game and call them from the bullpen. How do they perform? Did they take a little while to heat up, or are they quick to go to it and then they tire quickly? What does their stuff look like? You know, it's that pressure cooker approach. How clutch are they? You know, and how good is their stuff? Do they have enough stuff to attack people for multiple innings, or do they have basically you know, they're going to come in and throw 100 mile an hour past somebody? They're the thoughts that we want to be thinking about. So it's all to do with preparation and mentality, really, for me. And conversations with athletes, I think it's really trying to get the athletes to understand to understand what their role is. Everybody's on a team to succeed, right? And there's a guy who's won 3 World Series rings, and his name eludes me. But the guy, all he was a pinch runner. Okay, he only pinch run. He had like 1 at bat in however many years. It was ridiculous. But the guy was a pinch runner, and that's what he did exceptionally well. That's his role, and he understood that. And I want people to realize that just because you're a middle reliever, or a long reliever, it doesn't mean that you're worse than the starter. It means that you're perfect for that role. Okay, so I think it's having the athlete understand what their role is, and as soon as they accept that and understand that their mindset might be more suited for that, they'll absolutely blossom. It really will. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Josh. I do see there's a couple of youth coaches on here. The youth coaches is important to some of you at the same time. Here's your chance to ask Josh. It might be simple questions that you think, but it pertains to the youth and the pitching and stuff like that Josh will be able to assist us with, or answer questions on, or give you advice on. So a couple of the youth coaches. Josie, how long would you give a pitcher to feel out new mechanics before you think it's not working?
This is actually a tough question, because it is all to do with feel. The athlete will, in many cases, know if it feels, a word I would use is janky. Okay, I mean, it just doesn't look smooth. It feels a bit off. It doesn't feel great. But if they're truly uncomfortable, then that's probably a red flag very early on. If they're struggling to adapt a little bit, give them some time. These things take time, and especially as they start to get older. If you've had somebody who's thrown a set way for a decade, it's going to take a real time to unwind and get rid of that, and it feels uncomfortable for the athlete. So I'd probably say give it a couple of weeks of dedicated training. We don't often overthrow in the UK, i.e. we're not throwing enough to worry about our arms being overused, particularly, except if we throw too much on a Sunday. But what I would probably say is just give it a couple of weeks to settle in, throw every day, just a bit of throwing against the wall, play catch with a partner, a bit of long toss, and feel it out. That would be my advice there. Are there any recommendations from how many years children can specialize as pitchers? This is an interesting question because Tom House talks about this a lot, and he's a great guy to follow on Twitter if you don't. And my advice would be, when you're starting with youth pitchers, get everybody on that team to throw. Okay, you want to have a team that everybody throws an inning on that team in a weekend, or faces a couple of batters or something. What you'll find is, you might not win as many games as other people, but what you will find is by the time you get to the end of the year, you're going to have developed a lot of pitchers. And what I want to say is, it's about being athletic as much as you can, and that's why something as well that GB promote a lot is athletic throwing. So think about a shortstop and the way they move, like a Tatis or a Baez, people like that. They're very mobile in the way they move, and teaching that athletic throwing will eventually start to pattern. I'd say as you start to specialize as pitchers is probably in your early teens when that really starts to kick in. Up until that point, I'd probably say, just be athletic, go out there, play catch, and encourage them just have fun. Under that sort of age range. If you're not enjoying it and you're forcing mechanics on them, it's not fun for them. As they start to get a bit older into their early teens, that's probably a time to say, you've got it. Let's start concentrating on it a little bit more. Rich says, you mentioned throwing high and low. Which part of the pitcher's mechanics should the pitcher focus on? So this is a good question. So when they're practicing their throwing, if you've got them going through drills, they should focus on whatever they're having problems with. So if their issue is that their back leg is unstable, have them think about different ways to work on that. If they're not landing correctly and we want them to land open, but they're landing closed, try drawing a line on the floor with tape, and get them to really stride either side of it to force it. A good thing to do if an athlete is really having problems with their back hip is fasten some training bands to them and pin it with some weight at the other side and get them to really feel their hips being pulled open. That's something to say, but when we're actually in a game and when we're pitching in a bullpen, when we're throwing in simulated games or anything like that, the main thing I want them to do is just deliver the ball, concentrate on the target, think about what the catcher is asking you to do, and execute that pitch. The main thing at that point is the focal point. So this is where we talk about internal versus external cueing. So if I've got a drill, so something like a janitor throw, which is where we set ourselves backwards and then allow the body to rotate aggressively to encourage that feeling of being loose and whippy. By contrast, we're just thinking about how the way we move at that point. But when we are talking about anything game scenario, the focus should always be on executing their in-game basically control, command, velocity, because otherwise it won't replicate the actual stuff, and you'll start to see that they will become comfortable or forced a lot of the time. So just let them be loose at that point. I hope that answers that question. If not, just let me know and I'll talk about some other stuff. What sort of exercise would you recommend to help gain strength for pitching? Okay, so yeah, strength and conditioning is quite an interesting one. A few years back, there was a lot of stuff saying, obviously, don't lift at all, and then it went into this kind of like basically long distance running approach, like flush runs to try and get everything out after you finished a game and all this sort of stuff. That's gone. We want to be explosive. Look at somebody like a Usain Bolt, or any of the sprinters. They're athletic. They're strong. Okay, they look like weightlifters, and that makes them explosive. Okay, so fundamentally, if your strength numbers are quite low, so what I would say for any athlete is get in the gym, get a PT, and start working on your strength numbers. So that's things like, I want you to look at squats, hex bar deadlifts, or a hex or trap bar. So that's a deadlift you sit inside a diamond sort of shape bar. I want there to be a lot of like band work, so things like where we're doing external rotators with the arm, things like that. And anything to do with the chest, I would typically use dumbbells to allow that range of motion to be more comfortably gone through. And we're thinking as well, if we're doing anything typically that involves our elbows, 45 degrees is a good angle to have there, basically to prevent them getting into this lat dominant behavior. It's what we tend to see with a lot of athletes that display like lat dominance. So where the side of the next to the rib cage becomes tight, they struggle to lift their arms and things like that, which it can be problematic in itself. So avoiding lat dominant based exercises. And once you've got a good baseline of strength, I would say then move on to things like eccentric and isometric exercises. Eccentric being where if you were to squat with a weight, you'd move slowly down for maybe 4 seconds and then explode very quickly back up. So the weight would be a lot less than if you were squatting for strength. But at this point, we're now thinking about being powerful. That goes back to that Usain Bolt explosive running ideology. Okay, so we're trying to sit and absorb that for as long as we can and then explode out. So we want to do that. And then you couple that with isometric, where we move down and hold for a few seconds and then explode out, for example. And using anything to do with legs or deadlifting, things like that, or band work around the shoulders are great. Exercises to avoid are things like military or shoulder presses in excessive volume, because they can cause basically anterior, so the shoulders or the chest start to pull forward and you end up with inwardly rolled shoulders, and that can be tough for an athlete to therefore get their arm back. Okay. Tracy says, any hip mobility exercise you would recommend for old ladies like me? Oh, come on, Tracy, you're not old. So hip mobility exercises. So basically, there's obviously, if it's a real problem with your hips in its entirety, I would always seek help from a physio or a osteopath to gain sort of a professional opinion on this. But for myself, when I've done this in the past, because I've often had tight hips growing up, what I would typically do is you see exercise such as 90-90 pails and rails. So that's where you start with your legs at 90 degrees to each other. And what you do is you typically rotate into external rotation, so twisting outwards, and then you can typically then twist back inwards and keeping those legs in that 90-degree position on the floor. And that will start to, you'll feel it start to unlock the hips, and you'll feel like there's a little bit of tightness in and around the back glute, and do that on both sides. You've also got exercises such as figure 4 wall stretches, where you get your legs and cross them over each other on a wall, and you'll feel that in and around the hips start to unlock at the back. These are all very good things to do, but as I said, main thing I'd probably advise initially is go see a physio, and they'd probably prescribe exercises like that. But I'd probably say a wall stretch, a 90-90, and then on top of that, I would probably maybe say like a basically a bench stretch. So if you imagine you've got your bench in the gym, it's flat like that. Place one leg backwards as if you were lunging, and then place the other leg across the bench as flat as you can, and then sit down deep as you can into that, and you'll feel the stretch across the back of the glute. If that's too hard, you can always tilt the bench up to make it on an angle to make it easier, so you can sit relatively deeper. But as I said, always consult a physio before you do any of these. What are your thoughts on using weighted balls? To be honest, I absolutely love weighted throwing programs. I am sat on that side of the fence, and for those that don't know about this, people either fall one side of the other on weighted throwing programs. They believe that they can be dangerous, and if done and you see bad results. So people only use a 5-ounce baseball, and then you see the other camp which see huge increases in velocity, and that's where we see companies like Driveline really pushing the weighted ball programs. Now, the reason I would use a weighted ball program is because it really helps to increase chronic workload with an athlete. Chronic workload is basically where we try and increase the amount of work they're doing over a period of time. So that's why a Major League Baseball player can throw every day without feeling like their arm's falling off. Whereas for most people in the UK, if they've thrown back-to-back days, the second day, their arm doesn't feel like it's attached anymore. It feels really achy and tired. And so what we're trying to do is gradually increase workload. And the good thing about weighted balls is despite the increase in weight, what you'll actually find in some cases, or decrease in weight, I'll explain this as I go, an increase in weight, what you tend to find is actually less stress on the arm. The peak stress, the peak torque on the inside of the elbow where the UCL is actually lower because the arm is moving at a much lower speed. So we can actually typically throw more using that and really encourage the athlete to feel that whip and that layback, because the weighted ball is allowing them to sit back better in that position. And then the use of an underweight ball is slightly more risky, and this is where you have to be careful with this. So I struggle myself with underweight throwing. And that's where an athlete, if they have a pushy mechanic, I would avoid using weighted balls until you can start to fix that a little bit, especially if it's underweight throwing. So looking at a 4-ounce ball maybe, or a 3.5 ounce, because that pushing mechanism at high speed causes huge stress on the elbow. So unless they're able to pull the ball from behind, I would avoid underweight training. But as I said, the benefit of this is it creates basically under and overload on the arm. And that means over time, we condition the arm to accept more force. It can generate more force because it's stronger. And on top of that, it can move faster as well. Okay, so that's where the lighter weight training comes in. And over time, if done correctly and monitored, an athlete will see huge development in their throwing. Couple that then with long toss and any short box or bullpen work they're doing. A short box being basically like sort of maybe 50-foot bullpen with lower intent, working on command control. You'll see huge improvements over time. So I am a big fan of weighted ball programs, but they have to be executed correctly. And the main thing I would stress with them is you have to be very careful with how much you do, because you can easily overdo it. So if you're somebody who goes out and throws 100 throws a day, it's probably not the program for you. But if you can limit and you're willing to do maybe 5 throws of a certain weight with a specific drill, they're perfect. Jono, what resources would you recommend for people that don't have access to this level of coaching? Great question, actually. So there's a couple of programs that you can follow. So I know Driveline, for example, have a free throwing program that you can access on their website that you can download. I would also encourage people to go out there and have a look at a few reliable sources on the internet. Really good people to look at on YouTube are Driveline, Tread Athletics, people like Robbie Rowland. Robbie Rowland, I think, is fantastic. Okay, the guy knows so much. And again, look on places like Twitter, the guys like Tom House, they always talking about this stuff. But Robbie Rowland, Tread Athletics, Driveline, all fantastic places to go for sources of this information. They often have stuff that you can get for free, just to have like a basic program to get yourself into. And as I said, if you can, when it comes to things like sports, strength and conditioning, try and get hold of a PT, see what they can put together for you and explain your situation, I explained that you want something that basically gives you maximum range in that upper half. You don't want to be nice and tight up there. You don't want that. So that's what I'd probably say. Good sources on YouTube. And as I said afterwards, if anybody wants me to put a document together or share some of my of these companies that I would recommend, I'm more than happy to do that, and I'm sure it can be circulated respectively.
Any other questions from anyone? And if you didn't miss part of the presentation, it is being recorded, so it will be up on the BSUK YouTube channel in a few days for you to go back and have a look at certain things that Josh has explained, in your own time, which is quite nice for you to always have something to refer back to. But any questions while we still have Josh online? Thanks, Tracy. Fair presentation, Josh.
Thank you very much, Tracy.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Anybody else?
I said if there's anything that jumps to mind when you get, if you get down the line and you think, oh damn, I should have asked that, feel free to reach out. And I said BSUK can either put you in contact. GB could do the same, or worst case scenario, I'm sure most of you have mutual friends with me on Facebook. Find me on there and feel free to add me, and I will be always available to talk baseball. I absolutely love it. It's a huge passion of mine, and so feel free anytime to reach out for me. So hope everybody enjoyed that, and as I said, if there's anything you can think of, just let me know.
Perfect, Joe. We've done it in the past for the past few weeks, that if there was something that you did miss or something that you thought about afterwards in a question, the link that I sent out from BSUK, which then have our email details on. So if you can't get hold of Josh on social media or through mutual friends, please feel free to email BSUK or myself, and I'll sure definitely pass it on to Josh and then get back to you. I see the chat box going a bit.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it, guys. It means a lot. Really does. Really, really does. I'm glad I could help. Awesome.
Right. So before we pack it up, just giving the last of the people a chance to ask away. If there's anything else, please feel free. While we've got this last few minutes with Josh, and just like we say again, if it is a question that you want to ask later on, please feel free to get hold of Josh or BSUK, and we will definitely put you at the right place. Right, so we'll take it at that's it. Josh, from our side, we really appreciate you taking the time out to come and present to us. Really, really did enjoy that presentation. It's something that you don't think of or behind the scenes, trying to watch stuff, trying to make sure you're just trying to be, as a coach, make sure the pitchers are ready, get them on, get them throwing. And
exactly.
Like we said before, many of us are not walking properly these days or can't put our arms straight.
Exactly.
We didn't have any of this when we were younger, and unfortunately, I wish we did. So to yourself, Josh, thank you. Really, really much appreciated. And everybody else, thank you for being online. I do appreciate it. So last time, if you can't get hold of Josh, please get hold of us at BSUK, and we'll get in touch with Josh on your behalf. Otherwise,